There was a pastor who was opening his mail one day, and in one letter there was one single piece of paper with 4 large, bold letters written on it. And the letters were F-O-O-L, fool. The priest took the letter to his pulpit the next Sunday, showed it to the people, and he said, over the years I've received a number of letters where someone forgot to sign their name, but he said, I never got one where they signed their name but didn't write the letter. St. Paul tells us that if we think that we're wise in this age, that we should become fools so as to truly become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in the eyes of God. What is the wisdom of this world? There's 3 philosophies that are prevalent. First one is called individualism. It means that we ask the question always, what's in it for me? The world centers around me. The second one is hedonism. Hedonism sees that everything that exists for my pleasure. And so we always ask the question, what pleasure will it give me? And the third one, minimalism, means how little can I give in order to gain the maximum benefit? It's always what little I can do. 3 philosophies that are of the world, but they're not the philosophy of Christ. When we read the scriptures today, Jesus reminds us, St. Paul reminds us, to become fools if we want to be wise. And all those 3 philosophies are going to only lead to unhappiness, where following the way of Christ leads to happiness. And what is the way of Christ? It's one of selflessness. Jesus' self-sacrifice, ultimately giving his life on the cross for love of you and me. It's self-donation. Donation comes from a Latin word, donum, which means a gift. I've often looked at people in this parish and in my life who have truly been a gift to me because of the help that they gave or what they do for the church. They're really a gift from God. When there's a disaster like an earthquake or a hurricane, a fire, a flood, we all give to the need, don't we? Very readily and generously, and we should. But we don't, in the eyes of Christ, we take it another level, that we don't just give to a need, we need to give. And there's a difference there. We need to give. And when we do give, and if it's a self-sacrifice, there's a joy inside of us. There's a fulfillment inside of us that takes place. We need to give. And so those words of the scriptures today challenge us, I guess, to ask ourselves, where are we with the philosophy of the world and the philosophy of Christ? And another, in the gospel, the Lord reminds us, in the Sermon on the Mount, he's interpreting the old laws. And then he's saying, but I say to you. And so today we have the talion, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. In other words, we punish somebody in proportion to what evil they have done. And Jesus is saying something different. He says, pray for your enemies and love those who persecute you. It's really easy to love those that love us. It's more difficult to love those who have hurt us or have made us angry. I felt that way this week with that horrible news about the young 14-year-old girl who was kidnapped and brutally treated and murdered. 14 years old, she had Aliana DeFries. Beautiful picture in the paper and on the news. And anger, when they caught the man that did it, and I looked at him, I just was filled with anger. How could you do such a thing? And I'm trying to prepare this sermon, and I'm seeing Jesus say, forgive your enemies, love your enemies. I was seeing him as an enemy. And it was just revenge. I even felt myself saying he doesn't deserve to live. But that's not what Jesus would say. He would say, don't shed more blood and add to the blood that has already been shed by him. The Lord wants all of us to repent, all of us to turn away from the evil we do. And so I've had to take my own advice, which you've heard me say so many times. What do you do when you're truly angry with someone? The first thing to do is to pray for them. And as hard as it was, I prayed for that man, because I thought inside, I'm sure that he's totally distressed. And I just prayed that he would face up to what he's done and accept the consequences, perhaps life in prison. I think that's the only thing you do. And after I finished praying, I thought, all right, Lord, I have to put all things and all people into your hands. And it makes a difference when we handle it that way. I think you'd find the same thing. Something in us wants to seek revenge and payback. I don't know if I told you this story before, but there was a truck driver who stopped at a roadside cafe one night to get something to eat. And while he was in there eating, 3 rather nasty-looking motorcyclists came into the restaurant. And for some unknown reason, they gravitated towards him, and one of them poured salt on his head. Another one knocked his piece of pie off on the floor. And another one dumped his cup of coffee right into his lap. With that, the man got up. He didn't say a word. He paid his bill, and he left the restaurant. And those guys said, boy, he sure wasn't much of a fighter, was he? Well, the waitress was looking out the window, and she said, he might not have been much of a fighter, but he's not much of a driver either. He just ran over 3 motorcycles. And we like that, don't we? They got what they deserved. There's something in us that says, good. They should have been treated that way. But when we think about it, the Lord's saying no. He says in the scriptures today, don't seek revenge. Don't do the same thing that someone has done bad to you. And it's not easy. It's not easy to do that. The Lord wants everybody to repent. And so the Lord gives us some strong advice today. Love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you, pray for those who persecute you. And those aren't easy things to do, but it's what God asks of us. And when we do it, we remember Jesus hanging on the cross. And he said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. When they struck him in the face, he just said, why did you strike me? Jesus never retaliated. He always tried to get people to turn away from what they were doing. And he was always forgiving. And so the Lord forgives us too when we fail. So today, through these scriptures, let us thank God for his advice and help us to love those who don't love us and to pray for them that they will turn their lives around. We've been praying for Father Dan Begin for the last couple of weeks, really for several months. And he passed away yesterday morning. He was finally in hospice care for just a few days this week. Father Dan grew up here at St. Patrick's Parish, as many of you know, and he and I were in the seminary together. He's 3 years younger than me, and a wonderful guy, a really good priest, a loss to St. Mary's in Bedford, where he was the pastor. Father Dan, I remember when we were in high school, I was a senior, he was a freshman, and we were in the same dormitory at Borromeo Seminary. And there were a lot of rabbits all around the property. And one day we found a mother rabbit dead near the dormitory. And we looked around and we found the nest for her little bunnies. Well, they were developing pretty good, but they weren't ready to be on their own yet. And Jan and I were just really concerned about them. So we weren't allowed to have animals in the dorm, but we snuck them in anyway and provided a nice nest, and we got in the kitchen and got milk and whatever we could do to feed them and get them strong. Well, Father Murphy caught us. He was our prefect in the dorm. And he said, so you guys think you're St. Francis, huh? We said, no, Father, just that we can't let these little bunnies die. And so we nursed them back to health and then sent them back out into the woods when they were strong enough. But I remember that about Dan, and he always had a love for those who were in need, a love for people who were suffering. He did a lot of charitable work in his priestly life, and certainly he'll be missed by his people. And I look to him again and thank him for the witness he was to priestly ministry and living like Christ, and giving of himself for so many. I hope someone in our parish will take his place, and go to the seminary to become a priest in Father Dan's place. But keep him and his family and his parishioners in your prayers today, as we continue this Mass. And pray for all the priests who are ill in our diocese.